We are now talking to Sports Illustrated, all Dolphins publisher, Alain Poupart, who's joining us. He also does work for the Florida Panthers. How are you doing, Alan?
Doing all right, you guys?
Sorry to have you on a little bit late. One of our fans, one of the guys that helped us out last week, had his own thoughts of the baseball trade deadline. How are you feeling? How's everything going with your family with the COVID-19 situation?
No, doing good. We haven't gotten nailed by it. A lot of people down here are getting it, but so far so good.
Are you an Expos fan? I see you're wearing an Expos hat.
Yes, sir. Born and raised in Montreal.
Oh, look at you, man. And that's why you write for hockey and you write for the Miami Dolphins. So why don't we get into the Dolphins? Because everybody, we're back and forth with the Dolphins acquisitions over the summer. They added Tyreek Hill. Tyreek Hill comes out on his podcast and says Tua is the more accurate thrower than Patrick Mahomes. I don't know what the hell he's talking. I don't know what he's drinking, but whatever. What are your thoughts to the offseason of the Miami Dolphins? Do you think the Miami Dolphins, with the acquisitions they've made, even in the draft, where it wasn't the best draft but wasn't a bad draft, where do you see them going into this year in 2022?
Well, before I address that, what Tyreek Hill is doing with his comments on his podcast is he's pumping the tires of his new quarterback because he's his new quarterback and because the Dolphins paid him a crap load of money after they acquired him in the trade with the Chiefs. So he's being a good teammate and pumping the tires. Yeah, this is an interesting situation with this team. They were on the doorstep of the playoffs the last 2 years, 10-6 in 2020, 9-8 last year, which tells you they were really close. And with the additions they made, not only Tyreek Hill, but Teron Armstead to anchor the offensive line and the same defense coming back entirely intact, all 11 starters. Logic tells you that from that standpoint, well, then this is the year they burst the door open. But the flip side to that is, even though they were only a game out of the playoffs each of the last 2 years, in the money game both years, they got smoked by the Bills by 30 in 2020, and they got smoked by Tennessee by 31 points last year. So from that standpoint, they weren't that close. The Vegas over-under is right around 9, 8.5. So I think the notion that it's a slam dunk that they make the playoffs because of the acquisitions they made in the offseason, I think that might be a stretch, but they certainly can get there if things fall right, starting with quarterback Tua Tagavailoa taking a big step in his third season after 2 meh seasons so far in the NFL.
So the other big splash was Teron Armstead. They signed and bolstered that offensive line, and the offensive line that for the last 2 years has been the worst statistical offensive line in football. So what do you think of that move, and are you still having some concerns, especially with Tua's injury, with the rest of the line?
Well, yeah, because there's no guarantee that the offensive line is going to take a big jump. I might haggle with you a little bit as far as calling it the worst offensive line. There are some metrics where it was the worst. I think that was overblown. I don't think it was quite the horror show that it was portrayed to be, while clearly not being good enough. Having said that, Armstead, if he's right physically and can play the whole season, is going to make a huge difference, not only because of the quality he is as a left tackle, but also because of the intangibles he can bring as a leader, mentor for the rest of the line. Having said that, you're looking at a guy who is, 31, 32 years old, got a fairly lengthy injury history, coming off knee procedure in the off season. So far in camp, it's basically one practice on, one practice off for load management. If you're the Dolphins, you have to keep your fingers crossed that he can last, because if that offensive line doesn't take a big step up from 2021, that's going to hinder Tua's ability for himself to take a big step forward.
As everybody knows, we are talking to Sports Illustrated, all Dolphins publisher Alain Poupart. Alan, you look at Jalen Waddle. Last year, he had a very good season. Really, he was injured a little bit last year, but still stayed fairly healthy, coming off a year from Alabama where he wasn't as healthy, coming off a major injury. Now that Tyreek Hill is there is no more Parker. He gets traded over there to the Patriots. Do you think that this wide receiving core is much better than we have seen over there in Miami in the last 10 years?
10 years, it was much better than it was last year, that's for sure. The thing with Waddle, and he was the first to say it after the season, yeah, he got a lot of catches, but the yards per catch wasn't good. It was under 10 yards. And this is a guy who's a speed guy. And here's the thing that's, again, this is with everything Dolphins, there's glass half full, glass half empty. The glass half full here is San Francisco has led the league in yak the last few years with Mike McDaniel running the show over there or being a big part of the offense. That's the glass half full. The glass half empty is that both Hill and Jalen Waddle had very low yak numbers last year. So where does it fit? I mean, obviously you're looking at two guys who are like incredibly fast, and you see it at practice. I mean, you can see in games how fast Tyreek Hill is, but to see it in practice on a daily basis, it's like, Jesus, man, that guy can run. So the potential is there for the wide receiver core to be really, really good. And the Dolphins also signed Cedric Wilson from the Cowboys to serve as the third wide receiver, and he's a guy coming off a breakout season. So the potential is there, but again, it still has to be done on the field.
So you mentioned San Francisco with now bringing in Mike McDaniel after the whole Brian Flores situation. What have you seen so far with his offensive scheme in camp? Like you were mentioning, a lot of yards after the catch, a lot of motion. And are those receivers who has been taking a lot of those running carries, maybe trying to take on that Deebo Samuel type role?
Well, with the understanding that we have a certain media reporting policy that we have to adhere to, I can't give away too much because then I could tell you, but they'd have to kill me. So I'm not going to go there entirely. Well, the thing that's very noticeable is the running scheme, which is the outside zone, different than what they did. And you can see they have the backs to make it work. Specifically, another newcomer, Chase Edmonds, whose cutting ability in practice has been very, very apparent. Even though he's not a guy I don't think can be like the major carrier of the load, but the guy looks the part. And Raheem Mostert, who surprisingly was cleared for the start of training camp after the big knee injury he had last year. Also, really, really fast guy with the cutting ability. So that's the one thing you've noticed. I don't know that they're going to have anybody who's going to have the pure Deebo Samuel role. It could be that they use several guys to combine to do what Deebo provided for the 49ers. But, I mean, that guy is a rare animal just because of his skill set, which is very, very unique.
Losing Brian Flores was a big loss, I believe, for the Miami Dolphins. He's a very good defensive mind. He goes over there to Pittsburgh, helps out with a very good defense, one of the better defenses and younger defenses in the NFL. Miami is a very young defensive team. They played very well last year. Not as good as the year before, but they played better in the second half last year. And I think their secondary is definitely better this year than they were last year. I think this is going to be a fun defense this year, but there are a lot of good defenses in that division. Buffalo's defense is young and obviously going to use more younger players. The Jets added some big pieces to their defense this year that are going to be very explosive, adding even Kawan Alexander the other day. Where do you see the Dolphins defense in their division out of all the teams with the Patriots, the Jets, and then obviously the Buffalo Bills?
I don't mean to be wishy-washy, but that's the thing. Here's the thing. As I mentioned before, the Dolphins have every single solitary starter back from that defense, and they added Melvin Ingram. They added the third-round pick, Channing Tindall, the linebacker from Georgia. But as you mentioned, yeah, Brian Flores can coach defense, and I mean big time. And the big question is, how much of that defense was Brian Flores, him calling the shots, him designing the scheme, him running the show, and how much of it was defensive coordinator Josh Boyer? And that's a big question mark heading into the 2022 season is, can they maintain the same level of success without really the architect of that defense, which was Brian Flores? I don't think he was the mastermind behind that defense. So the potential is there, and they ended the season on a high note and defensively with a pretty good string, but that also has to be couched with the fact that they faced Tyrod Taylor, Mike Glennon, Ian Book, Zach Wilson, Joe Flacco, Tyrod Taylor. So it was murderer's row of quarterbacks that they faced in that second half of the season when they made the comeback from 1-7 to put themselves in the position where they could have made the playoffs, eventually wound up 9-8. So, but the potential is there. You mentioned Jalen Phillips. Javon Holland looks like a complete star in the making at safety, but I don't think it's a slam dunk that they're going to be as effective as they were last year down the stretch. That's, again, another one of those where you can look glass half full. They're going to be just as good, if not better than they were last year. Glass half empty. They're going to miss Flores a bit and take a little bit of a dip.
So obviously the big news today, obviously you can't reveal all that you said with the media restrictions, but Stephen Ross getting suspended for a year following. They didn't say anything about the Flores, but the Tom Brady and Sean Payton thing. Are you surprised on this kind of thing, considering how the Dolphins front office has operated, trying to go for those flashy names?
No, I mean the stories were out there that they were going at, and in fact, what was revealed was even more extensive than what was pretty much well known. There were some people down here who were like, "Yeah, no, they didn't go after Tom Brady. They didn't go after Sean Payton. Those were the guys. They were with Tua all along." Well, no, they really wanted to trade for Deshaun Watson last year, and eventually at the end decided not to because not all of the civil lawsuits had been settled. And then in the offseason, yeah, they would have liked to have Tom Brady. Whether that could have been arranged while he was still under contract with Tampa Bay is a different story, though, because of cap ramifications and ownership and player and all that. But no, not surprising. And Stephen Ross is somebody who's always liked the shiny toys. So him going for the big move, I mean, Ndamukong Suh, Mike Wallace, when there was a period of time when there was a big free agent available, the Dolphins would go after him. So, and at one point, it was like before the 2019 college football season, Tua was the guy that wanted the tank for Tua's thing. Then Joe Burrow became the guy, and then Dolphins, Stephen Ross and the Dolphins really wanted Joe Burrow, couldn't convince the Bengals to make a trade, wound up taking Tua at number 5, and he hasn't splashed out the way they had hoped. So Deshaun Watson now becomes more enticing possibly. That Tom Brady becomes more enticing. So no, it wasn't overly shocking that those, allegations proved to be true. And as far as the allegations of tanking and offering money to lose games on purpose in 2019 to secure a higher draft pick, that was always going to be incredibly difficult to prove, because even if it said, look, I'll give you $100,000 if you lose a game, you can always say, no, I was just joking. Obviously, we were trying to win. So
we all know about Stephen Ross. He's a New York native, and he always likes that shiny new toy. And he will do anything to get it, as we all know.